Alright, Shalom, Shalom. This is your brother Issachar coming back at you with another lesson. First and foremost, I like to give all praises, all honor and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Makak Radash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Peace and blessings to the hopeful elect. Okay, in today's lesson, Akim, we're going to go into spiritual power, okay, and how our forefathers in the past, King David, Samson, Elijah, you know, they all had spiritual power, okay, and spiritual power is not far-fetched, all right. So we're gonna get into a quick history. We're gonna get into the book of Samuel, on what King David did. Okay, so without further ado, let's get right into it. This is the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 17, on down. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shilkah, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Sok and Isaac the Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side. And there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath, of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had an helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass, and had greaves of brass upon his legs, and targets of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. Okay, so pretty much that's describing Goliath. Okay, because Goliath was very tall. Okay, he was a warrior. Okay, and he was with the Philistines. Okay, let's continue. This is verse 8. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am not I a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and to kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants to serve us. Okay, so Goliath is challenging the Israelites, telling them, find a man to fight me. If you're Israel, if the warrior from Israel wins, then the Philistines will be their servants. But Goliath's saying, but if I win, if I kill him, then you guys got to be our servants. Okay, so he's calling them out. Okay, verse 10. Okay, 1 Samuel 17, verse 10. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard of those words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Okay, now David was the son of the Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons. And the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the three eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his three sons that went to the battle were Eliab, firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the three eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren, and carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with a keeper, and went. And Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. And all men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with the great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living power? Okay, so that's King David. Remember, he's a young man at this point. Okay, he's very young. Okay, and he's telling them, who is this clown? Okay, he's saying, who is this guy? All right, because the Lord Yahweh Shimi Ashai was with David. Okay, so David, he's a young man, telling him, who is this guy? Okay, to defy the armies of the living power. Okay, and the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killed him. Okay, verse 28. And Eliab the eldest, the eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the man. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why camest down hither, and with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou might siege the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner, And when the words were heard which David spoke, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Okay, so David's telling Saul, don't be afraid of this, because he was, Goliath was huge. Okay, he was a giant. Right, he was huge, and the men of Israel were afraid. But young David at this time, was telling him, "I'll go fight him." Okay, like let no man's heart fail him. Okay, and Saul said to David, "Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." And David said unto Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servants slew both the lion and the bear." Okay, because young David, he slew and just killed a lion and a bear. "And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living power." David said moreover, "The Lord Yahweh Shem Yahushai, that delivers me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." Okay, because David knew that the Lord was with him, and he knew that he would help him. All right, so he had no doubt, okay, that the Lord Yahweh Shem Yahushai would be with him in the battle. And Saul said unto David, "Go, and the Lord Yahweh Shem Yahushai be with thee." And Saul armed David with his armor, and he put an helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armor, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them." And David put them off him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose him 5 smooth stones of the brook. Okay, so young David took off his armor and put down the sword that Saul gave him to go fight Goliath, the Philistine. He says, "I haven't earned them." So he put down his shield and the sword, and all he took was his staff and five little rocks. Okay, 5 smooth stones. That's it. All right. And the Philistine came on and drew near unto David. And the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of a fair conscience. And the Philistine said unto David, "Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field." Then said David to the Philistine, "Thou comest to me." Okay, so Goliath told David, "Come to me, and I'm going to slay you." And young David said, telling this big old huge, soldier, Goliath, telling him, "Nah, you come to me." All right, all right. So then David said to the Philistine, "Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord, Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, Lord of hosts, okay, Lord of armies, okay, the power of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied, okay. David's telling him, you come to me with your armor and your sword, and I'm I'm coming in the name of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, okay. Verse 46, this day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and I will take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, a power. Okay, and all this assembly shall know that the Lord Yahweh Bashim Yahushai saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it. Okay? And slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and fell upon his face to the earth. Okay, so young David took his stone and just chucked it, and went right through the head of Goliath. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and the smote Philistine, and slew him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw the champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel of Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley. And the gates of Ekron, and wounded of the Philistines, fell down by the way of Shiram, even unto Gath, and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem. But he put his armor in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell. And the king said, inquire thou whose son the stripling is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. Okay, Akim? So, that was just a, quick little, story on King David, King David was just a young man, and he slew, that Philistine, Goliath, okay, with a stone, all right? Because why? Because Yahweh Bashim Yahushai was with them. Okay, same thing in these times, all right? Once Esau makes his move, and, they start, coming down with martial law, and they start, coming against the men of the Lord, miraculous miracles are going to start happening. Okay, the Lord's going to step in. The Lord's going to fight our battles. Okay, remember King David, he took down a whole troop. Okay, a troop, what's a troop? It's an army. Okay, remember David, through the power of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, he was able to take on the whole army by himself. Okay? Remember in Psalms 2 it says, with thee have I leaped over a wall. Remember like that movie like Troy, all them war movies, David he was able just to leap over the wall. Okay, leap over the walls and smite all the Philistines. Okay? Moab, the Chinese, okay? The Edomites, the so-called white people today, Ammon, the so-called Japanese, they have our history. They know these records. They know these records exist. They have it. Okay, they have our records. That's why Esau's afraid. Okay, because the house of David, okay, the 144,000 is awakening. Okay, the prophets are back. All right, that's why Esau is scrambling. He has to hurry up and push his new world order because he knows the house of David is arising. Okay, and they will be unstoppable. Okay, so that's just a quick lesson, on our King David. Just remember that, Akim. You know, don't 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 fear these devils. Okay, they got no power over us. Yahweh Bashim Yahushai is with us, and His angels were protecting us. Remember, there's more of angels that are with us than the bad ones that are with them. Okay, so we ain't got nothing to fear. The main thing is call on those names. The Lord Yahweh Bahashim Yahushai is our strong tower. Stay strong, Akim. Keep the good fight. Keep the faith. Shalom.